every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. The world is quietest just before dawn. In Waukesha, Wisconsin, on the morning of May 31, 2014, that quiet was thick and dewy, a profound stillness clinging to the manicured lawns and silent suburban streets. Waukesha is the kind of place that embodies the American ideal of safe, quiet living. It's a comfortable bedroom community just west of Milwaukee, a city of pleasant parks, good schools, and neatly kept homes. It is a place where the horrors of the world are meant to be kept at a distance. Things you read about happening somewhere else, to someone else. It is the last place on earth you would expect to find a monster. But on that ordinary Saturday morning, a monster was stirring, not in the shadows of an alleyway, but in the minds of two children. Inside one of these Waukesha homes, 3 12-year-old girls were waking up from a sleepover. The night before had been a celebration for Morgan Geyser's 12th birthday. There were likely whispers and giggles, the sharing of secrets that form the sacred bonds of childhood friendship. The birthday girl, Morgan, her friend, Anissa Wire, and their shared friend, Peyton Leutner, known to her loved ones as Bella. To any parent looking in, the scene was a tableau of youthful innocence, as unremarkable as it was universal. Peyton had been friends with Morgan the longest, since the 4th grade. She saw Morgan as her best friend, a quirky and creative soul. Anissa was a newer addition to their circle, a quiet girl who seemed to follow Morgan's lead. There was nothing on the surface to suggest that this friendship was anything but normal. But the quiet of that morning was a lie. It was a curtain behind which a meticulously constructed, deeply bizarre and terrifying plan was waiting to be set into motion. A plan that had been germinating for months, nurtured in the digital ether and whispered about in school hallways. It was a plan predicated on a belief so profound, so all-consuming, that it had completely eclipsed the boundaries of friendship, morality, and reality itself. As the girls got dressed and headed out into the cool morning air, ostensibly to play at a nearby park, 2 of them were carrying a terrible secret, and one of them, Morgan Geyser, was carrying a 5-inch kitchen knife in her bag. They walked to David's Park, a familiar landscape of playgrounds and green spaces, a place Peyton had likely been to countless times before. But they didn't stop at the swings or the slides. They kept going, heading for the tree line, for the cluster of woods that bordered the park. The official reason, the one given to Peyton, was that they were going to see the birds, to play a game. Peyton, trusting the girl she considered her best friend, followed them in. The woods swallowed them up, the morning light filtering down through the canopy of new spring leaves, dappling the ground in a shifting pattern of light and shadow. And in that deceptive light, the ordinary world fell away. The game they were about to play was not hide-and-seek. It was a ritual, an offering, a desperate, terrifying act of fealty to a phantom they believed was watching them from the shadows between the trees. A tall, faceless man in a black suit, a man who did not exist anywhere but on the internet and inside the fractured minds of 2 young girls. The events that transpired in those woods would not only shatter the lives of 3 families and horrify a nation. They would peel back the screen of the 21st century and force us to look at the strange and terrifying shapes that can emerge from the deep web of our collective imagination. This case is not simply about an act of violence. It's about the very nature of belief in the digital age. It's about how a story, created as a piece of internet art, could mutate into a gospel, and how that gospel could demand a blood sacrifice. Today, we dissect the anatomy of a digital delusion, the story of the Slender Man stabbing, a crime that illustrates how the ghosts we create online do not always stay where we put them. To understand how two 12-year-old girls from Waukesha, Wisconsin, could come to believe that stabbing their friend 19 times was a necessary, even unavoidable act, we first have to understand the object of their devotion. We have to understand the Slender Man. He is not a creature of ancient folklore, not a myth passed down through generations by firelight. His genesis is precise, documented, and entirely modern. He was born on June 10, 2009, in a thread on a niche internet forum called Something Awful. The culture of these forums was steeped in a particular brand of dark, ironic humor and a love for creative, often unsettling digital projects. The forum was hosting a Photoshop contest, a call for users to take ordinary photographs and digitally manipulate them to contain a supernatural entity. The goal was to create convincing paranormal hoaxes, images that looked just real enough to plant a seed of doubt, to make the viewer's skin crawl. A user named Eric Knudsen, going by the screen name Victor Surge, submitted 2 black and white photographs. The first showed a group of children playing in a yard, their clothes and the grain of the photo suggesting a bygone era. In the background, looming near a tree with an unsettling stillness, was a tall, unnaturally thin figure in a dark suit. He had no discernible face, and long, shadowy, tentacle-like appendages seemed to sprout from his back. The second photo showed a playground, and near the slide, the same spectral figure was visible again, an impossibly tall sentinel watching over the children's games. Crucially, Knudsen didn't just post the images. He added snippets of cryptic text, fabricated quotes meant to build a sliver of a narrative. Beneath one photo, he wrote, "We didn't want to go, we didn't want to kill them, but its persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us at the same time." 1983, photographer unknown, presumed dead, and beneath another, one of 2 recovered photographs from the Sterling City Library blaze, notable for being taken the day which 14 children vanished, and for what is referred to as the Slender Man. Deformities cited as film defects by officials. Fire at library occurred 1 week later. Actual photograph confiscated as evidence. In just a few sentences and 2 doctored images, Knudsen had created something potent. He had tapped into a primal vein of fear, the unknown observer, the uncanny valley of a human-like shape that is fundamentally not human. The Slender Man was terrifying because of what he lacked: a face, a motive, a clear origin. He was a blank slate for fear, and on the internet, a blank slate is an invitation to create. Almost immediately, other users on the Something Awful forum began to build upon Knudsen's creation. They embraced the open-source nature of the character. They added their own photoshopped images, their own fabricated witness accounts, police reports, and children's drawings. The myth began to grow, organically and collaboratively, a process that would come to define modern internet folklore. This new form of storytelling came to be known as creepypasta, a portmanteau of creepy and copypasta, which is internet slang for a block of text that is copied and pasted over and over across forums and social media. Creepypasta stories are the digital equivalent of campfire tales, but with a crucial difference. They are presented without context, often as first-hand accounts, blurring the line between fiction and a potential terrifying reality for those not steeped in the culture. The Slender Man mythology exploded. It became the Internet's first great crowdsourced monster. People wrote thousands of stories about him. A complex, often contradictory lore developed. He was said to stalk his victims, particularly children, for months or even years, inducing a state of paranoia and illness that came to be known as Slender sickness, characterized by coughing fits, nosebleeds, memory loss, and intense paranoia. He could teleport. He could cause electronic devices to malfunction. His very presence was said to warp reality. Most importantly, for our story, a mythology developed around his followers. Those who served him, either willingly or through coercion, were known as proxies. They were human puppets, compelled to carry out his violent will. The concept of the proxy was a crucial narrative invention, as it allowed for stories to be told from a human perspective, detailing the psychological horror of being enslaved to this silent, faceless entity. The myth spread from niche forums to every corner of the web. It spawned a highly influential YouTube found footage series called Marble Hornets, which began in 2009, the same year the character was created. Marble Hornets built an elaborate multi-year narrative around a young film student being stalked by a figure they called the Operator. This series was instrumental in codifying many of the Slender Man's traits and introducing the proxy concept to a wider audience. The myth also inspired video games, most notably a simple but terrifying free-to-play indie game released in 2012 called Slender. The 8 pages. In the game, the player wanders through a dark, claustrophobic forest at night, armed only with a flashlight, tasked with collecting 8 scattered pages while being relentlessly hunted by the Slender Man. The game was a viral sensation, amplified by Let's Play videos on YouTube showing gamers screaming in terror. For millions of young, internet-savvy people, Slender Man was as real and as culturally present as any monster from classic horror films. But for most, he was a thrilling fiction, a ghost story to be consumed and then left behind on the screen. For Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier, however, that line between screen and reality began to dissolve. They didn't just consume the stories, they absorbed them. They found the Slender Man mythology on the Creepypasta Wiki, a vast online library of user-generated horror fiction. And on that website, scrolling through endless tales of disappearances and proxy attacks, they found what they believed to be the incontrovertible truth. According to the specific lore they subscribed to, a patchwork of different stories they had stitched together, the Slender Man lived in a mansion deep within the Nicollet National Forest in northern Wisconsin. This detail was critical. It made him a local entity, a tangible presence in their state, not some abstract global monster. They learned about the proxies and became convinced that this was their calling. To become a proxy, they believed, one had to prove their loyalty, and the ultimate proof of loyalty, the only offering worthy of such a powerful being, was to kill someone. Only then would the Slender Man deem them worthy. He would welcome them into his mansion, where they would live with him forever, safe from the mundane world of school and family. But this was not just about devotion. It was also about a profound, paralyzing fear. The girls came to believe that Slender Man was a constant threatening presence in their lives. They claimed to see him in the trees, to be able to communicate with him telepathically. They believed he could read their minds, and would visit horrific violence upon their families if they disobeyed him or tried to back out of his plan. For Anissa and Morgan, he was not a story. He was a real, powerful, and demanding entity, their principal, their parent, their God, and he had given them an order. They had to take a life. The digital ghost had become their master, and the price of their faith was to be paid in blood. This shared belief became the engine of the tragedy, a feedback loop of delusion that would grow stronger with every shared whisper, every late-night search, every glance into the woods, until it was powerful enough to make them pick up a knife. The bond between Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier was forged in the lonely spaces of middle school. They were both 12 years old, navigating the notoriously difficult social hierarchies of an age where fitting in feels like a matter of life and death, and in many ways, they didn't fit in. Morgan was quiet, artistic, and often seemed lost in her own rich internal world. She had been best friends with the victim, Peyton Leutner, since the 4th grade. Their friendship was built on a shared love for animals, for playing make-believe, for drawing and creating stories together. But as they entered middle school, Peyton began to notice a change in Morgan. She was becoming more withdrawn, her behavior more eccentric. Her fascination with darker subjects, with characters from horror stories and films, began to intensify and dominate their conversations. This was the outward manifestation of a storm gathering within her mind. A storm that would later be given a name: childhood-onset schizophrenia. It is an incredibly rare and severe diagnosis, characterized by hallucinations, delusions, and disordered thinking that begin. But in 2013 and 2014, it was simply Morgan, the quirky, artistic friend who was becoming harder and harder to reach. Into this world came Anissa Weier. Anissa was also struggling to find her place. Her family had moved several times, and she found it difficult to make and keep friends. She was described by those who knew her as lonely and desperately wanting a sense of belonging. When she met Morgan Geyser at school, she found a kindred spirit. Morgan was different, and in her difference, Anissa found a place to belong. They were two outsiders who found solace in each other's company. Their friendship quickly deepened, but its foundation was built on something unusual and ultimately toxic: their shared discovery of and fervent belief in the Slender Man. It was Morgan who introduced Anissa to the mythology, and Anissa, eager for a connection, embraced it wholeheartedly. For Morgan, whose mind was already susceptible to blurring the lines between fantasy and reality due to her undiagnosed schizophrenia, Slender Man wasn't just a story, he was an explanation. The strange things she might have been seeing or hearing, the disorganized thoughts, could now be attributed to him. He was a framework for her deteriorating perception of the world. For Anissa, who was looking for something to believe in, and a way to cement her bond with her only friend, Slender Man was a powerful secret, a shared reality that set them apart from everyone else. He was their special knowledge, their dangerous, thrilling purpose. This dynamic is where the anatomy of their digital delusion takes on a specific clinical shape. It bears all the hallmarks of a phenomenon known as folie à deux, French for a madness for two. Today it is more clinically referred to as a shared psychotic disorder. This is a rare psychiatric syndrome in which a symptom of psychosis, typically a delusion, is transmitted from one individual to another. It almost always occurs in a close, often socially isolated relationship. There is a primary person, the one with a genuine psychotic disorder, who develops a delusional belief. And there is a secondary person, who is typically more passive, dependent, and not initially psychotic, but who, through their close association with the primary, comes to internalize and believe the delusion as their own. In the case of Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier, it is widely believed by psychiatric experts that Morgan was the primary. Her undiagnosed schizophrenia made her the source of the delusional belief system. She truly believed Slender Man was real. that he was communicating with her, that he was a physical presence in her life. Anissa, in her desire for friendship and acceptance from Morgan, became the secondary. Morgan's conviction was so absolute, her internal reality so compelling, that it became Anissa's conviction. They created an echo chamber for two. Every fear, every supposed sighting, every perceived command from Slender Man was validated and amplified by the other. Their isolation from their peers only strengthened the bond and the potency of the delusion. They were no longer just Morgan and Anissa. They were a unit, united in service to a dark master. And that master, they believed, had a task for them. The idea of needing to kill someone to become a proxy was not a sudden impulse. It was a plan that they developed and refined over a period of at least 6 months, from December of 2013 to May of 2014. Their conversations, which they thought were secret, were filled with chillingly practical discussions of murder. They spoke of it with the same casualness that other children might use to plan a weekend outing. They researched methods on the internet, learning about pressure points and how to kill someone quickly. They needed a victim, and their choice was heartbreakingly simple. Peyton Bella Leutner, Morgan's longtime best friend. The reasoning was as cold as it was tragic. They needed someone they could get close to, someone who trusted them. Peyton trusted Morgan completely. She was, in their horrifying calculus, the perfect target. Anissa later explained that she felt it had to be Peyton, because unlike with her own family, she didn't feel any particular empathy for her, making the act seem theoretically easier to accomplish. Morgan's motives were even more disturbing. She claimed to love Peyton, but the command from Slender Man superseded any feelings of friendship. The delusion had become a higher calling, a non-negotiable directive that erased all other loyalties. They planned the how and when with unnerving deliberation. Their initial plan was to commit the murder during Morgan's 12th birthday party sleepover on the night of Friday, May 30th. They would wait until 2 a.m., tape Peyton's mouth shut while she slept, stab her in the neck, pull the covers over her, and flee. They discussed this, but when the moment came, in the dead of night, they couldn't go through with it. Anissa would later say they were too tired, that they wanted to give Peyton one more day of life. Morgan said she was too squeamish. This hesitation reveals a flicker of their true age, of the childlike thinking that was grotesquely intertwined with their adult-like planning. So, they moved to Plan B. The next morning, they would lure Peyton into the woods at the nearby park. They would do it there. They packed a bag with supplies for their journey to Slender Man's mansion, granola bars, water bottles, and a collection of Morgan's dolls. And hidden among these items was the murder weapon, a 5-inch steak knife Morgan had taken from her kitchen. The stage was set. The characters knew their roles. And the digital delusion, born on an internet forum 5 years earlier, was about to manifest itself with brutal, devastating force in the real world. The morning of Saturday, May 31st, broke over Waukesha with the promise of summer. For Peyton Leutner, it was the end of a fun birthday sleepover with her best friend. When Morgan and Anissa suggested they go to David's Park to play, it seemed like a perfectly normal thing to do. The three girls walked together, the mundane nature of their journey a stark contrast to the intent carried by two of them. They passed the playground, the familiar territory of childhood, and headed towards the woods. Morgan and Anissa said they wanted to play an extreme version of hide-and-seek, a game they had all played 100 times before. They ventured deeper into the trees, past a public restroom, and into a small clearing. And there, the pretense of the game began to shift. Anissa suggested to Peyton that she lie down on the ground and cover herself with leaves and sticks to hide better. Peyton, perhaps sensing something was strange, but still fundamentally trusting her friends, was hesitant. She later said she didn't want to get her clothes dirty. A strange tension filled the air. Morgan and Anissa exchanged a look, a silent communication that the moment was arriving. Then Anissa gave a signal. She told Morgan, "Go ballistic, go crazy." She would later tell police that she wanted Morgan to get it over with, that the anticipation was becoming unbearable, and she feared she couldn't go through with it if they waited any longer. Morgan Geyser, holding the kitchen knife she had concealed, hesitated for a moment. She handed the knife to Anissa, who also hesitated, then handed it back. Finally, Morgan told Peyton to lie down on the ground, claiming she would be able to hear the birds better that way. Peyton complied. What happened next was a frenzied, terrifying explosion of violence. Morgan lunged at Peyton, pinning her down. She began to stab her, again and again. Peyton screamed, fighting back, trying to understand what was happening. She was stabbed 19 times, in her arms, her legs, and her torso. The wounds were scattered, a sign of a frantic, uncontrolled attack. Several wounds struck major organs, one missing a major artery near her heart by less than a millimeter. During the attack, Peyton's eyes were open. She was looking at her friend, the girl she had known for years, the girl she had just had a sleepover with, as she tried to kill her. The horror of that betrayal is almost impossible to comprehend. Amid the chaos, Morgan stopped. Anissa had been standing nearby, watching, encouraging. With Peyton lying bleeding on the forest floor, the two girls seemed to have a moment of what they would later describe as concern. They told her to stay quiet, that they would go and get help. It was a final, cruel deception. As they began to walk away, Peyton managed to ask a question. "I trusted you," she said. Morgan's reply was chilling in its simplicity. "I'm so sorry." Then she and Anissa turned and walked away, leaving their friend to die in the woods. They had completed their task. They had made their offering. Now their journey to Slender Man's mansion could begin. But Peyton Leutner did not die. In an act of almost unbelievable courage and will to survive, she fought back against the encroaching darkness. She knew that if she stayed in the woods, she would be found too late, if at all. After Morgan and Anissa left, she waited, then slowly, painstakingly, began to move. She later recalled thinking, "I'm not going to die out here. I am going to survive." Fueled by adrenaline and a primal instinct for life, she pulled herself up. Holding her own wounds to staunch the bleeding, she began to crawl and stumble out of the woods towards the edge of the park, towards a small road. The journey was agonizing. Every movement sent searing pain through her body, but she kept going, tree by tree, until she finally emerged from the woods. She managed to drag herself onto a grassy patch of land near a sidewalk. It was there that a man named Greg Steinberg, out for a morning bicycle ride, saw her. At first, he didn't understand what he was looking at. A small girl, lying on the ground. He thought maybe she was homeless or had fallen asleep. As he got closer, he saw the blood covering her clothes. He rushed to her side and asked what happened. Peyton, barely able to speak, told him she had been stabbed. She told him to get help. Steinberg immediately called 911. The 911 call captures the shock and horror of the discovery. Steinberg is calm but urgent, relaying information to the dispatcher. "I've got a young lady on the ground here," he says. "She says she's been stabbed." He asks her who did it. Peyton, despite her grievous injuries, was able to provide crucial information. She told him it was her best friend. Steinberg stayed with her, comforting her, assuring her that help was on the way. When paramedics and police arrived, they were confronted with a scene of unimaginable violence inflicted upon a child. They worked quickly to stabilize her, rushing her to Waukesha Memorial Hospital. Doctors there would later say her survival was nothing short of a miracle. The knife had pierced her liver, pancreas, and stomach, and had come within a hair's breadth of her heart. She was immediately taken into surgery, where she would spend the next 6 hours fighting for her life. While Peyton was fighting, a different kind of scene was unfolding just a few miles away. The police, having gotten a preliminary description of the attackers from the victim, immediately began to search. They didn't have to look for long. Around 2:30 in the afternoon, nearly 5 hours after the stabbing, a Waukesha County Sheriff's deputy spotted 2 young girls walking along the shoulder of Interstate 94, the main highway running through the area. They were Morgan Geyser and Anissa Wire. They were calm. They were not running. They were simply walking north. In their bag, police found the dolls, the snacks, the water bottles, and tucked inside, wrapped in a jacket, was the bloody knife. When the officer stopped them, they surrendered without any resistance. They seemed, by all accounts, completely untroubled by the gravity of their situation. The deputy asked them what they were doing. They answered truthfully. They were walking to the Nicollet National Forest, hundreds of miles away, to find the Slender Man's mansion. In their minds, their mission was complete, and their reward was waiting. Their journey, however, was not over. It was about to take a new path, into a sterile interrogation room, where the full bizarre and terrifying anatomy of their delusion would finally be laid bare for the world to see. The police interrogations of Morgan Geyser and Anissa Wire are some of the most unsettling documents in modern true crime history. They provide a direct, unfiltered window into the girls' fractured reality, a world in which a fictional internet character held the power of life and death. The detectives who conducted the interviews were walking into the unknown. They had a brutal stabbing of a child, and 2 12-year-old suspects who were found calmly walking down a highway. Nothing about it made sense. The girls were interviewed separately, in small, windowless rooms. Anissa Wire spoke first. The video of her interrogation shows a small, nervous girl in a purple hoodie, her legs barely reaching the floor. Initially, she was guarded, offering short, evasive answers. But as the detective gently prodded, the story began to spill out, a torrent of fear and bizarre logic. She explained that the stabbing was for Slender Man. She described him in detail. Tall, faceless, wearing a suit, with tentacles that could emerge from his back. She talked about him as if he were a known public figure, a celebrity or a politician. The detective, completely unfamiliar with the character, had to ask her to spell the name so he could look it up online. It was a profoundly 21st century moment in a criminal investigation. Anissa's confession was driven by fear. She told the detective that she believed Slender Man would have killed her and her family if she didn't obey his command. "I was really scared," she said, her voice trembling, "knowing that Slender could easily kill my whole family in 3 seconds. She explained the mythology of the Proxies, the mansion in the forest, and the need to commit a murder to prove their loyalty. She recounted the planning, the aborted attempt during the sleepover, and the final decision to do it in the park. Her description of the attack itself was detached, almost clinical, but her belief in the supernatural force compelling her was unwavering and absolute. She cried, not for her victim, but out of fear of what Slender Man might do. She seemed to believe that her arrest was merely an obstacle in her journey to meet him, not a consequence of a violent crime. The interrogation of Morgan Geyser was, in some ways, even more disturbing. While Anissa displayed fear and remorse about the potential consequences for her family, Morgan displayed a profound lack of emotion. a flat affect that baffled the seasoned investigators. In her video, she sits with her arms crossed, rocking slightly, speaking about the stabbing in a matter-of-fact tone, as if describing a school project. She admitted to being the one who held the knife, the one who inflicted the wounds. When the detective asked her if she felt any remorse, her answer was chilling. She said that the stabbing was necessary. Morgan's confession was driven by devotion. She spoke of her communication with Slender Man, a connection she seemed to cherish. She claimed he could read her mind and teleport. She also mentioned other fictional characters, like Lord Voldemort from Harry Potter and one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, whom she believed were real and lived with Slender Man in his mansion. Her reality was a seamless blend of pop culture fiction and violent delusion. When asked if she knew the difference between right and wrong, she said she did. She understood that stabbing someone was wrong. But the logic of her delusion provided a justification that superseded conventional morality. The command from Slender Man was a higher law. The detective asked her if she felt bad about what she had done. Morgan paused, then said, "It's a long story." She explained that the part of her that was Morgan felt bad, but the part of her that was a servant of Slender Man felt it had to be done. It was a stark articulation of a mind at war with itself. She seemed to possess a strange double awareness, a flicker of understanding of the real world's rules, but it was utterly powerless against the powerful tide of her internal delusional world. One of the most haunting moments came when the detective asked about Peyton's condition. Morgan replied with a question, "And is she dead?" The detective told her that Peyton was alive. Morgan was quiet for a moment. Her reaction was not one of relief. Her primary concern was that a failed murder meant a failed sacrifice. Slender Man would now be angry with them. The interrogations made it clear to law enforcement that this was not a case of bullying that had escalated. This was not a typical juvenile crime. They were dealing with something entirely new, a motive born in the strange wilderness of the Internet and nurtured by severe, untreated mental illness. The confessions were detailed, consistent with each other, and consistent with the physical evidence. There was no question as to who had committed the act. The only question, and the one that would dominate the next 3 years of legal proceedings, was why, and more importantly, what does justice look like for 2 children who committed an adult crime for a reason that was, by any rational measure, insane? The legal system is built on concepts like intent, motive, and a shared understanding of reality. The Slender Man case challenged all of these. The Waukesha County District Attorney, Brad Schimmel, was faced with a difficult decision. Under a specific and controversial Wisconsin law, any juvenile aged 10 or older charged with first-degree attempted homicide is automatically tried in the adult court system. Despite their age and the bizarre nature of the motive, Schimmel charged both Morgan Geyser and Anissa Wire as adults. The charges were attempted first-degree intentional homicide. If convicted, they faced up to 65 years in prison. The decision was immediately controversial. It sparked a nationwide debate about juvenile justice and the capacity of the adult legal system to handle cases involving severe mental illness in children. The defense attorneys for both girls immediately began the long and arduous process of reverse waiver, arguing to have the case moved back down to the juvenile court system. In the juvenile system, the focus would be on rehabilitation rather than punishment, and the girls could be held only until the age of 18, followed by a period of community supervision. The core of the defense's argument was that Morgan and Anissa were not cold-blooded criminals in the adult sense. They were children, suffering from profound mental health issues, who were unable to appreciate the wrongfulness of their actions because of their shared delusion. Their legal teams argued that the adult system was simply not equipped to provide the kind of intensive psychiatric treatment they so clearly needed. The prosecution, on the other hand, argued that the crime was too severe, too premeditated, to be handled in the juvenile system. They pointed to the 6 months of planning as evidence that this was not an impulsive act, but a calculated and heinous crime that warranted the seriousness of an adult trial. For years, the legal battle over jurisdiction raged, going all the way to a state appellate court, which ultimately sided with the prosecution. The girls would be tried as adults. With the trial set to proceed in adult court, the defense strategy shifted. They would not argue that the girls didn't commit the act. The confessions made that impossible. Instead, they would argue that they were not criminally responsible for their actions. Both girls entered pleas of not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, often referred to as an insanity defense. This set the stage for a series of intense psychological evaluations by court-appointed doctors. Evaluations that would finally put a clinical name to the chaos in the girls' minds. Morgan Geyser's diagnosis was stark and heartbreaking. She was diagnosed with early-onset schizophrenia, the same illness that her father suffered from, suggesting a genetic predisposition. Psychiatrists testified that she experienced powerful delusions and hallucinations. She truly believed Slender Man was her friend, that he visited her, and that he commanded her to kill. Her reality was fundamentally different from everyone else's. Her illness was not a legal excuse, the doctors argued. It was the very engine of the crime. During her years in custody awaiting trial, she was placed on antipsychotic medication. As the medication took hold, the delusions began to recede. For the first time, she began to see Slender Man not as a real entity, but as a symptom of her illness. The slow, painful process of separating herself from her delusion had begun. She eventually told a doctor that the stabbing didn't make sense, and that her belief in Slender Man was crazy. Anissa Weier was diagnosed with a different, though related, condition. She was found to be suffering from a delusional disorder and schizotypal personality disorder, a condition characterized by social anxiety, paranoid ideation, and eccentric beliefs. She did not have schizophrenia, but her own mental health vulnerabilities made her highly susceptible to Morgan's psychosis. She was the classic secondary in the Foley-Adair dynamic. Once separated from Morgan, her belief in Slender Man began to weaken. Though it never vanished entirely, she continued to express a belief that he was real, but her fear of him lessened over time. The psychiatric consensus was that she would likely not have participated in such a crime on her own. But under the powerful influence of her psychotic friend, she came to accept the delusion as truth. The legal proceedings for the two girls concluded separately. In August of 2017, Anissa Weier pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of attempted second-degree homicide as a party to a crime. However, she maintained her plea of not guilty by reason of mental disease. A jury was tasked not with determining her guilt, but with determining her mental state at the time of the crime. After deliberating for over 11 hours, the jury found that she was indeed mentally ill at the time of the attack, and was therefore not criminally responsible. She was sentenced to be committed to a state mental health facility for a maximum of 25 years, the longest period possible under the law for that finding. A few months later, in December 2017, Morgan Geyser accepted a plea deal to avoid trial. She pleaded guilty to attempted first-degree homicide, but like Anissa, she was found not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect by the judge. The court, acknowledging her more severe mental illness and her role as the primary actor in the stabbing, committed her to a state psychiatric institution for a maximum of 40 years. The legal chapter of the story was over. There would be no lengthy prison sentences. Instead, there would be years of court-ordered psychiatric care, a quiet, clinical epilogue to a story that had begun with a whisper on the Internet. In the years since the crime, the lives of the three girls have moved forward on starkly divergent paths. Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier have spent their teenage years inside the walls of the Winnebago Mental Health Institute. Their days have been structured around therapy, medication, and education, all aimed at treating the underlying illnesses that led them to the woods that day. In July of 2021, after 4 years of treatment, a then 19-year-old Anissa Weier petitioned for conditional release, arguing that she was no longer a threat to society. Doctors testified that she had made significant progress, had gained insight into her delusion, and had developed remorse. The court granted her release, and in September of 2021, she walked out of the institution under strict conditions, including GPS monitoring and continued outpatient psychiatric treatment. Morgan Geyser remains committed, continuing her treatment for schizophrenia. In 2024, she also petitioned for release, but her request was withdrawn after psychiatric reports were not favorable. And then there is Peyton Leutner, the survivor. For a long time she remained anonymous, her family shielding her from the media storm that swirled around her case. She endured dozens of surgeries and years of physical and emotional therapy to recover from the trauma of the attack. She has scars, both visible and invisible. She slept with a pair of broken scissors under her pillow for a time, a testament to the terror that was inflicted upon her by the person she considered her best friend. But she did not let it define her. In 2019, she chose to speak publicly for the first time, to reclaim her own story. She revealed a young woman of remarkable resilience and grace. She spoke not with hatred, but with a kind of weary acceptance of what had happened. She has gone on to graduate high school, to pursue her interests in medicine, to plan for college, to build a life. She has embraced her identity, not as a victim, but as a survivor who refused to be erased. Her strength is the one point of light in this profoundly dark story. So we return to our central question. What is the anatomy of this crime? It is not found in a single place. It is a complex, terrifying structure built from multiple interlocking components. The first component is the fertile ground of the Internet. The Slender Man was a new kind of monster, a collaboratively built specter whose lack of a definitive canon allowed people to project their own fears and fantasies onto him. The creepypasta format, presenting fiction as potential fact, created a dangerous ambiguity for vulnerable minds who lack the sophisticated media literacy to distinguish collaborative storytelling from genuine accounts. The second component is the tragic vulnerability of the perpetrators. This was not a case of two healthy children who were simply tricked by the Internet. It was the story of one child with a severe, undiagnosed psychotic illness, and another child with her own deep-seated issues of loneliness and social anxiety. Their minds were uniquely prepared to accept the Slender Man delusion, not as a story, but as a reality. The Internet did not create their mental illness, but it provided the specific, terrifying content for their delusions to latch onto. a prepackaged narrative for their fractured perceptions. The final and perhaps most crucial component is the phenomenon of the shared delusion, the folie à deux. Isolated from their peers and immersed in their shared secret world, Morgan and Anissa created a powerful feedback loop. Each one's belief validated and intensified the others. Morgan's psychosis gave the delusion its raw power, and Anissa's belief gave it confirmation and a practical, planning element. Together, they built a private reality with its own set of rules, its own moral code, and its own divine authority. In their world for two, stabbing their friend was not an act of malice, it was an act of faith, a terrible but necessary sacrament. This case serves as a chilling parable for the digital age. It demonstrates that the membrane between our online and offline worlds is far more permeable than we like to believe. The ideas, stories, and beliefs that incubate in the anonymous, unregulated spaces of the Internet can and do have profound, real-world consequences, especially for the young and the vulnerable. For most, Slender Man is a fun, spooky story. But for two vulnerable girls in Wisconsin, the story became a script, and the script demanded a real human sacrifice. It is a stark reminder that the most terrifying monsters are not the ones that hide in the shadows of the woods, but the ones that can take root and grow in the fertile darkness of the human mind. The tale of Slender Man is a fiction, but the story of what happened in Waukesha is a brutal truth, a warning that the ghosts we invent in the machine can sometimes find a way to crawl out. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.